All right, we are live. Welcome to Beyond the Fundamentals. We got Nick with us. You can go ahead and turn your camera on. Um, we're supposed to have, for those of you who don't know, we're supposed to have Doug join us. It is in the thumbnail. And sometimes we have difficulty connecting all the way out there to the West Coast. Could be a technical thing. Not exactly sure yet. As soon as Doug is able to come in, we will add him to the call. In this session, we're talking about the Alistair Begg. I don't even know how to pronounce it. Did you hear anybody pronouncing the name?
No, but I think it's Alistair.
Alistair, not Alistair.
Yeah, I'm not
Alistair
sure.
Begg.
I know they call him Al for short.
Al.
Yeah,
Al Begg. Alistair.
Al Begg.
Alistair Begg. Okay.
Yeah.
So the controversy is what I'll do is I'll go ahead and kind of share briefly what's been going on so far. I'll share my screen and just read along these slides. Says Alistair Begg was removed from hosting his podcast on the Christian network American Family Radio after clips from a September episode recirculated online in which he advised a grandmother to attend her grandson's wedding to a transgender person. Um,
hmm
well, here's the thing. And this is quoting him, and this is all from the link to this is at the bottom. I got this all offline at this link down here. Well, here's the thing. Your love for them may catch them off guard, but your absence will simply reinforce the fact that they said, these people are what I always thought, judgmental, critical, unprepared to countenance anything.
Mm.
Begg said, adding that as long as the grandson knew she is not affirming his life choices, then I suggest that you do go to the ceremony and I suggest that you buy them a gift. And then the American Family Association said in a statement to Fox News Tuesday that the members of our leadership team held a call with Alistair Begg's team and were unsuccessful in convincing them of his error,
hmm
which that's so hubristic to even if that's an accurate quote, that's just so hubristic. So the American Family Association said, at American Family Association, we believe it to be an act of unfaithfulness to God to attend a ceremony that celebrates any union outside of the biblical model of marriage as being between one man and one woman, the organization said. As a result of this, we will no longer air Pastor Alistair Begg's Truth for Life program.
Mm.
And I think I have one more slide on this. And then Begg doubled down on his advice in a sermon Sunday while also doubling down on his stance against homosexuality. Now, I put this in brackets because the original article, I think the article might be some kind of hit piece against Christians in general. But I just grabbed one just to figure out what was going on with this. And it originally said his homophobia here, which I don't advocate the use of like attaching phobia onto things is kind of dumb in my opinion. He insisted to an audience that is at his church that I'm not ready to repent over this. I don't have to, while also maintaining the only place for sexual relationships is within a heterosexual monogamous relationship between one man and one woman for life. What happens to homosexual people, in my experience, is that they are either reviled or they are affirmed, he stated. The Christian has to say, we will not treat you in either of those ways. We cannot revile you, but we cannot affirm you. And the reason that we can't revile you is the same reason why we can't affirm you, because of the Bible. And this now we're quoting Alistair Begg here. Because of God's love, because of his grace, because of his goodness. So that is a synopsis of what is going on. And now I'm trying to make a decision on whether or not we should move into Doug's comments without Doug here. Let me see if okay. I thought he might have responded via email, but I do not see it yet. What do you you want to talk about some initial thoughts you have? Nick,
Yeah, well, I
or
mean, I don't know if we need to inject Doug stuff right now. I think we can maybe just spend the time stalling a little bit, maybe just to give a little bit of framing into the perspective that the three of us or the two of us might take in regard
yeah,
to this. So, from my standpoint, I haven't had any engagement or any kind of interaction with anybody who would be in this camp of conservative Christianity slash, Calvinistic Christianity. Because
yeah,
the whole group that's dealing with this is, I guess, the whole theologically obsessed, academically obsessed American Christianity. Like, I don't think that this is a thing within like the at-large Catholic uh denominations or the Orthodox denominations within America, but it may or may not be. The whole point is that
yeah,
it's totally off my radar.
yeah,
However, after Doug proposed that we take a look at this and talk about it because he had some good thoughts on it, I started doing a little bit of research on just what the situation is, and it just seems to me that overall perspective, the general perspective or I've been taking this from the get-go has been one of an evaluation or a sense that there's a scarcity of wisdom in these very, very large groups of uh, Christians. There's
yeah.
a
It's a
lack of,
scarcity of wisdom in these very large groups of Christians.
yeah,
Speaking of
and
wisdom in
yeah.
groups, Doug's arrived.
Had a
What?
senior moment. I knew we were meeting at 11, but then it was 12 your time, and I decided it was 12 my time. So my apologies. And I
No,
got so
you're good.
involved in this topic that I lost track of reality. So
No,
anyway,
no, I thought your comments on this really good were really good, Doug. And I think there's two different issues here, and one of them is uh, an analysis of what Alistair Begg said right off the bat, and then there is the response to it, like what's happening to Alistair Begg as a result of having actually said this. And something I said to Nick earlier, it seems that I think Alistair Begg is a Calvinist, and it sounds like he made the mistake of actually thinking instead of just instead of just towing the line to what you're supposed to think, the simulated thinking that everyone's supposed to do.
yeah, I mean my reaction to this was kind of interestingly kind of an internal rage at
Mm,
Oh,
all that
really?
I was hearing. Yes, I haven't had anything impact me like this. Maybe the two Roxborough women or whoever it was that got canceled from their church, things like that
Yeah.
can really stir me up. But profound stupidity and ignorance around being able to think and process appropriately
mm,
so that we can advance the kingdom, so we can proclaim the gospel, not as short-sighted, people that don't care about the truth. I mean, the issue here for me wasn't whether or not somebody should go to. I want to talk about that, but whether somebody should go to a gay or transsexual wedding,
mhm,
as the mindlessness with which all this happened at the blink of an eye. Multitudinous numbers of people were asking him to repent,
mhm,
Yeah.
and he was canceled. I think it's sickening. It was a sickening feeling inside of me uh, that was separate from just the issue: do we go to that kind of wedding or not?
yeah,
So,
Yeah, that I agree with that. It's two separate issues all at once. Like the ability to be able to say something without being canceled.
yeah,
It's like if you're only allowed to do simulated thinking that the echo chamber approves of, why do we even have different people?
yeah,
Why don't we just have the Institutes of the Christian Religion from John Calvin and just sit around and have those read aloud to us all the time? Why
yeah,
even have different people? I think that I think that people actually doing a little bit of thinking is probably good for us. I have your comments over here. I can pull those up and share them. Hope they're not too
I was
small.
brainstorming in my own head. Good to see you, Nick.
You too, Doug. Yeah, one of the things that we started saying as we were opening up was there's a difference in personal proximity or even emotional proximity. You even opened up with saying that you're at a point of very deep, frustration about this. I'm coming from a perspective which in proximity to it is very distant, and so it's not it's not affecting my body as much as it may be yours. So I think that we should use that the difference of proximity to be
Yeah,
able to
yeah,
oscillate, something
sure.
nice
A little bit of
for
a
the audience to
stereoscopic
see.
vision.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You can be the rational one and I'll be the emotional one.
Um,
Um,
I kind of like to put
yeah.
your comments up and start working through them, unless you had another comment you want to make, Nick.
Well, I just wanted to say that from Doug's initial introduction there, I thought it might be really super interesting to try and not that this opportunity would present itself, but try and tease out and discuss with somebody who is vehemently uh, for everything that's happened to Alistair Begg and try and genuinely, you know, settle them down maybe and get them to at least try and expand the
Try to think
thinking.
something other than the stock talking points.
Yeah, I
Yeah,
mean, me
yeah.
and Kevin and I tried to do this a little bit with George Antonios, and I don't know how successful it was. I don't think it was all that successful. However, it's still very juicy and meaty to me to try and sink my teeth into that kind of an emotionally charged situation, so I don't know that we'll get the chance to do that, but
I
it'd be
think
interesting
part
to
of
at least think about it.
yeah, I think part of my sensitivity too is that, as a clinician of 40 some years now, um, dealing with so much spiritual abuse in my practice, especially over the last maybe 10 years, and seeing, because we're becoming more wise to that. And this is partly what this is. It's
Oh
canceling
wow.
somebody because of an idea
Hmm.
they had. And that's really what a lot of spiritual abuse is. You're not aligning yourself to the think tank of the church or the crowd you're in. And all of a sudden you find out you can be canceled, for an idea, is profoundly disturbing to me, because I'll tell you, both of you, I want to be proud to be aligned with the Christian church.
Hmm.
And one of my internal thoughts was, I'm divorcing myself from church. It's
Mm.
never going to be part of my life again. Now, I haven't, sometimes I make proclamations to myself that aren't really fully true, because I probably won't land there completely. But I'm sick of this. I'm sick of this. So I listened to a sermon today,
Hmm.
but from February 4th by Alistair Begg, who was preaching at somebody else's church, I think, on salvation and the deal with Nicodemus and being born again. And he did a really good job with it. And if it wasn't for a little bit of a slight few comments at the end, I wouldn't know he's a Calvinist. Um, he
Yeah.
really believes that God is the author of salvation and we aren't, but that we have a choice to be made. And he said something interesting too in one of his reactions to, not on that sermon, but to this whole controversy, is that we over here in the United Kingdom think a little bit differently. There are nuances to us.
Hmm.
And I thought, boy, what an opportunity for somebody to come out and try and maybe burst the bubble of Calvinism. And he's probably not going to do it. But
Mm.
boy, he could have come close to representing some of the thoughts we all have on this podcast here.
Well, I think I mean could let me try to make a statement and see if we all agree with it. Um we have a lot of very what do I say? a lot of new types of thinking about gender, sexuality, and sexuality lately. And Christians aren't doing a very good job of addressing it adequately. So is that fair to say?
I would agree with
Yeah,
the,
no,
So
yeah, I
when
would agree
really.
with
someone
the heart of that.
tries, when
See,
someone
this could,
tries, Alistair tries to do something with this situation that we're all in, and the only thing we can all do is just cancel him.
yeah, yeah. Yeah, and I thought, what a brilliant idea this would have been, or concept for the Shepherds Conference, to engage one another in how do we address these problems of the world that we
Yeah.
all face that have such complexity. No, he's just canceled. There's no invitation for discussion. He's just wrong, and everybody on the internet, with one exception, said he's wrong and should be canceled and needs to repent. The arrogance of telling somebody when they do and don't need to repent all by itself is amazing to me. But
Yeah.
uh, just some of this, and it's really kind of sad to me because it really conveys the idea that in our world, all the level the world thinks in is good guys and bad guys, and there's no discernment,
Yeah, it's
there's
all
no
black and
elaboration
white.
of thought. It's all black and white, and it's just scary a little. It's even in politics a bit that way.
Well, I think what the two of you are getting at too is, and I'm sure we'll get deeper into this, but is the notion that in order to train up a group of people or an individual, they have to have opportunities where there's a sense of dichotomy or paradox or some unresolved, idea or some unresolved plan of action where they have to go through the steps in order to flex their wisdom muscles. They need to have that
Yeah,
afforded to them. And it just seems like the whatever paradigm of the American church we're talking about, I'm not sure how it's defined or anybody, but there's certain characters involved, John MacArthur, John Piper, R.C. Sproul, et cetera, et cetera, Justin Peters and whatnot. But it's like there's no wisdom on the part of the
Right.
quote elders to
good point.
afford people the opportunity to develop their own relationship or their own skill set of wisdom.
Well, it's
And
just like
that,
in counseling, like I didn't mean to cut you off, but I feel like I really need to jump on this. Like Jordan Peterson says, and I'm sure you could chime in on this as the professional, Doug. He says that when you're trying to help somebody work through a problem, it's very important that you don't tell them what to do, but you help them develop the solution and the strategy to get to the desired end state they want because of two things. Number one, if your idea works, you just stole their victory. Number two, if your idea doesn't work, now they have another reason to externalize their resentment against the situation they're in toward you now. And number three, they walk away from the situation with no new wisdom muscles on how to strategize to solve problems. And I
right,
see that in the church here. We have everyone jumping on the stock answer: stone these people, burn them, the equivalent of burning people at the stake in a day and time when we're not allowed to do so. And there is everyone's going to walk away with, if you just keep doing that, with no new capacity to solve problems and navigate and strategize. And the thing is, we're supposed to be, Jesus says, you are the light of the world, right? Who are we a light to? Everyone else, right? And so how can we be what I it seems like people don't realize is that these everyone else, no matter what their proclivities are, they are on this planet too, whether we like it or not. And we better figure out how to relate
No,
to them, not just come up with shoulds and should nots, because that's not relating very well. That has not been doing very well. How do
amen.
we how do we get to the point where we can help people no matter what their situation is? How can we be present in their life to continue to influence them to strive for the next rung on their ladder of transformation? because everyone has that next rung on their ladder. And if you are going to just ostracize and stigmatize people, all you're going to do is remove yourself from the equation of those who can help them get there.
Yeah.
And I think it's terrible.
Yeah, I would agree. It's
I
well
want to
said.
say thanks for the super chats real quick from one day. Appreciate that. As you were saying, Doug.
Yeah, I agree with the sort of the counseling angle on it too. It's the only thing one thing I disagreed with Alistair Begg is rather than tell her that, I would have explored that idea with her.
Yes, the same thing.
Mhm.
Yes.
Yeah, I would have wondered what she felt. And the reason in part that I would do that is not just to help her make a decision about whether to go to the wedding, but participate in her growth as a believer, to create a discipleship opportunity, to
Mm-hmm.
help her
Mm-hmm.
think through her faith and her
Yep.
salvation and what those things mean. And I would have the opportunity to love on her and be with her in that process. That would be my role. So, that he forfeited that role. That's the
Yep.
biggest disagreement I have with him. He forfeited that
So
role.
yeah, so I put myself in those shoes, and it's like it's not like I disagree that there is an appropriate time to do what he said, but I disagree with the telling of somebody else what to do. So a way that I might word it is you are in the situation, you have to decide what's appropriate. And if you in your following of the Lord and you're reading the situation and your understanding of the relationships that you want to maintain and the telos that you're trying to achieve by your interactions with these people, if you decide that you're going to go to the wedding and give a gift, I'm not going to judge you for that, and I'm not going to disfellowship you for that. And if you decide that you're not going to, I'm not going to judge you for that or disfellowship you for that. But those are the options at your disposal. You have to make the decision, and I'll help you think through that. But I cannot make the decision
Yeah.
for you. But the
I think
but I think a lot of people would just condemn you if you make the decision to go and bring a gift. They automatically judge you for it, and I think that's the only thing that I would agree with is at least not being judgmental if someone chooses that, because that
yeah,
might be appropriate in that scenario.
yeah.
But it's
And
impossible for us to know.
I think the only thing I would add to that is in counseling her, to put it a little bit maybe more simply, is um, to this grandma, you're a believer. What do you think about it? What are the things
Yep.
you're wrestling with? What are the controversies within you or not? Why would you want to go and why would you not want to go? Nobody's asking these things.
Right.
Right. Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
And maybe they did in their conversation. I don't know. But those are the things I would have wanted to know, so I could get a feel for how she thinks, so I could have an opportunity to influence her in a better thought process that would give her the opportunity to make the best decision for herself. And whether or not she makes one that I feel is better than the other is less important than she worked it out in her own faith at this point in time. I'm not going to throw my faith and my ego and
hmm
my executive functioning and my profound wisdom onto her, um, which is Calvinism at its core. I know you're going to pull up some notes and it might be interesting to go off those, but I want to give an
Yeah.
example of what I would do in
hmm
this
Yeah.
situation.
Yeah.
Um, because I've thought a lot about this, and I think this is partly why it stirred me up so emotionally. So I'm going to take my 13-year-old grandson, who's still developing his thoughts about sexuality and all kinds of things.
hmm
Assume he's heterosexual. I mean, I would guess, but anyway, it doesn't matter. Um, and when we moved here 12 years ago to Colorado, he was 6 months old. So I love all my grandkids, but I had a developmental process with him
hmm
that was that's brought me really close. I'm not going to say he's my favorite, but I'm probably closer to him
hmm
than the other grandkids just because I've had those experiences with him. And so I thought about that. I thought, let's say 5, 6, 7 years from now, he wants to get married. And I think of this relationship I have with him. I built it around my faith. I built it around my influence. I love him. He loves me. Um, he can't wait to come and hug me if I see him, even at 13 years old. He likes to sit next to me at dinner, and we golf together and do all kinds of things. We have a huge bond.
Mm-hmm.
And so suppose now he's 21 or whatever, I'm still alive. I've got to factor that one in there too at my age. So I'm still alive and he's getting married, right? And he's gay or transsexual, doesn't matter. And he's going to have a wedding. Okay. If I don't attend that wedding, I will eliminate that bond with him. It will go away at some level. And I would never want that. I would never want that to happen.
Right.
Now I'm assuming that maybe I've talked to him about the wedding already, and helped him think through his process in this, yada, yada, yada. But nevertheless, now I'm in a dilemma. Am I supposed to serve my Lord by not going? Or am I supposed to serve my Lord by going?
Mm-hmm.
To the same question,
Mm-hmm.
because I love him. And if I don't go to the wedding, the next time he invites me and my wife over for dinner, I can't go there to either.
Yep.
So I have to shun him. He's out. He's canceled. So what they're asking Alistair Begg to do, they're canceling him. And they're suggesting that he should have told the grandma to cancel her grandson. But you see how personal it gets. I would never destroy my bond with my grandson for a number of reasons, just because that's how Christ wants me to love him. And secondly, when I go to a wedding, this may sound shallow, but I'm never really celebrating the marriage. I'm celebrating two people that love each other. That's all I'm doing when I go there. We're not going to be married in heaven, by the way. So
You're
I
not
would never
celebrating the
not
open
go.
bar?
Yeah, right. Exactly. I would never not go to my grandson's wedding. In a million years, I would not go.
Well, you
Because
never
that
know
would,
what your grandson is going to face 10 years later.
absolutely.
And the 10 years later, you may still need to be an integral part of his life.
Yeah.
And if
Yeah.
you've removed yourself from that, you may have subtracted from the equation that which he needed most when he
Yeah.
needed it, because you
Yeah.
were optimizing for a pre-specified set of rules
Yep.
rather than reading the situation with wisdom and love.
And what I've told him is that I don't love him really as much anymore.
Right.
I'm
You
not going to your
reduced him
wedding.
to his series of choices rather than granting him the intrinsic value of being a human in the image of God.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Now, this doesn't mean this would be everybody's reaction. This is just mine. Okay.
Right.
I'm
Right.
not trying to impose that on what everybody ought to think about this grandmother going to the wedding, but she's working out her own salvation too, I assume, because she went to see a pastor about this. So who am I to interfere with that? But I'm certainly not going to cancel my grandson and contradict the relationship I've had and look like a hypocritical fraud and somebody that doesn't really love him as much as he thought I did, amongst other things. So that was just kind of an interesting. I thought through this as I was going along. Now, would I go to somebody else's gay wedding? If I knew them, let's say it's a cousin, and I really don't know them, I probably wouldn't go to the wedding anyway. But
Right.
if it was somebody in the family that I wasn't quite as close and connected to, I would still go for the same reason. I represent Christ and his love more than I do an idea or a dogma. And I would still want to celebrate two people's love for each other. I believe gay people, I know have gay friends. I know they can love each other. And for all we know, the grandson's born again. Nobody even asks these things. They're just not.
So Jesus says, the spirit moveth whithersoever it listeth, and you can't tell where it's coming from or where it's going. So is everyone that's born of the Spirit of God. Well, if ideological Christianity was true, you could be like, well, the spirit's not going to be at a gay wedding,
Yeah.
But the reality of the Spirit of God is that it's unpredictable. It kind of moves and flows, and you can't predict it. But
That's right.
they're trying to like scale a predictable version of Christianity, which is antithetical to the fact that anything is spirit led.
Yeah.
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 Yeah, that's an important distinction or observation to make, Kevin, because Doug, one of the things that I think was very uh, profoundly at the forefront of what you were saying and what kind of does frustrate me to a degree is the inability for these big time Christian leaders to understand something so simple and so fundamental as human group value structures. And it's like implicit in their value structures is this cap where they cannot transcend their own value structures. And that's part of the whole notion of repentance and of transformation or confirmation, con-formation to the image of Christ is the implicit and divine ability for an individual human being or a group of human beings to transcend their current value structures. And it's like this American Christianity um, social group has a glass ceiling, if you will, on their value structures where it's only like it caps out the most honorable, the most virtuous thing you could do is, you know, pander to the current ideological dogma. You can't transcend it. So that's like the highest value that they have. Like, for example, how do I know this? Alistair Begg may have been hailed as a Christian hero and a Christian martyr if he told little old grandma that she doesn't love the Lord her God if she goes to this wedding, and that the struggle of faith, it was testing her faith to see how loyal she would be to God and have to, sacrifice her only son like Abraham to Isaac. That would have been like the manipulative twist on it. And I'm sure that some people did do that. Um, but it shows an inability to distinguish the difference between a moral structure which is limited in its ability to serve a potentially higher value structure or a larger moral structure, which is one of love. And that's why Paul goes to such great length in Corinthians to say, love is king. That's
Yeah.
it.
The greatest
So
of these is
any
love.
value structure that serves love in the end, regardless of how distant it is in the sequence of events, like if you're acting in a loving way for the sake of something 10 years from now, which is probably what it would have been to go to the wedding, um your mind has the bandwidth and the expansiveness of thinking, the wisdom of thinking to consider something 10 years into the future and make a decision in the present tense that
Sagacity, seeing
yes.
looking ahead.
And
Yeah,
so
I
that's
love that.
what
That's
bothers
good.
me
That's good.
is
Good
the
stuff.
the inability for the current value structures to transcend themselves or even know where they come from or what larger value structures they may be nested in.
Yeah.
Because the value structure that says, love the Lord thy God with all your heart, soul, and mind, and all of that stuff, that can be twisted and manipulated and potentially appropriate to say, actually, no, I can't go to this wedding because of this XYZ. And, that's okay as long as your reasoning is sound. But it just seems like in the Alistair Begg example that I loved looking at listening to his reason, because his reasons were, in my estimation, better serving the love of God. And he was exercising his own senses both to discern good and evil. So he knew the evil, he knew what the good was, and he had the sense to be able to see the betweenness of the two. and impart some kind of a suggestion. So so yeah, I think that that was very staunch, and in the foreground of what you were saying is the inability to really transcend or consider one's own value structures, because those value structures that you are participating with are too rigid and walled and not conscientious and not reflexive, and have no ability to think outside of their own strongholds and their own walls. And that is by all measures the antithesis of wisdom. Totally
Yes.
the antithesis
Yeah.
of wisdom.
It's a great way to put it all. Not this is a little tributary, but that's a little bit of how I think of Hebrews 6 of
It's
somebody that
funny I
can't.
brought this
That's
up
funny.
and
Yeah.
used
But
your
it,
name in vain in a conversation with Nick earlier, how Hebrews 6 comes into it. Anyway, go ahead, Doug. I won't steal your
well,
thunder.
I think the person that can't be brought back, I don't think they could have ever been saved to begin with, because that sealing, that hardness of heart
Mhm.
is impermeable. And even though they've tasted the good things of God, even though they've experienced the people around them, uh, that are rejoicing in the Lord, they can't not only be turned back, but I don't think they can accept the gospel to begin with,
Mhm.
because there is this allegiance to whatever their dogma is, or their pride, or their hardness of heart. And that's the whole story of Romans and the Jews and the hardness of heart, and Romans
Yeah.
9, 10, 11.
Yep.
Um, but I think there's something to be said for this. And I haven't worked out this, completely, but like you're showing there, Kevin, for it is impossible for those who were once enlightened and tasted of the heavenly gift and were made partakers of the Holy Ghost to repent and come back. Why? I don't think they could have ever been saved to begin with, potentially. Or at least during this process, they've decided they're wiser than God's gifts, and whatever, happened at the time. I guess I could look at it both ways, but it's an
Yeah.
interesting scripture.
So there's so many things I want to say on that. Like I want to put a pin in something for you, Nick, later that we could discuss. You mentioned having a cap on the ability to transcend one's value structure. And if you have a cap on the ability to transcend, that limits what's available in the omniscient domain, which also limits what's available in the immanent domain. And you can no longer press toward the
Can't move.
mark.
You can't move.
You
You're
can't move.
static. You
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 can't
can't
move.
move it.
Which is a practical defiance against the Trinity. Because the
100%.
immanent, the omniscient, and the transcendent, that is the Trinity in reality.
Right.
And
And
if you
what's the first thing? What's the first thing that the Spirit of God does in the Bible?
moved,
It moves, because it's the
yeah.
I would
transcendent. Because the
I would
Spirit is
add
the transcendent.
first. I love that. I mean, I would add to that too, that that I have no idea what I was going to say. Uh,
That's okay. That's because Kevin and I are working through something right now that we don't understand at all. So
but
Yeah,
I like
we're
pinning
playing
that, because
we're
I think
playing
that's a
some
good idea.
games.
we've been
Yeah.
talking about imminent domain metaphysics. This anyway, it's it. uh, We've been going back and forth on this all morning for like 3 days, really, actually. And beyond that, that's just immediately, but beyond that, for months and months. But
But I like that
I,
idea of you can't transcend your own value system, because you don't have a value system of becoming.
mhm.
You have a value system that's
That's the
static.
transcendent mode.
Yeah, the transcendent mode. You don't have that within your. That's why Hebrews 6 is interesting to me, in part,
Mhm.
because you can't get beyond your own limitations. And if we have a gospel that is asking us to believe what we believe, that already is transcendent and above our
Yes.
limitations. But
Right.
Yes.
it's a great
Yes. So
subject.
part of the transcendent mode is to have a descriptor, or at least a criterion of what it would look like to move out of the current situation, to transcend out of this current
Yeah,
situation,
yeah, I
to
love that.
transfer up or transfer down or move side to side. You have to have
Yeah.
that criterion explicit within the domain, which could say to you, you have moved, you have transformed. There's got to be a standard, or like I said, a criterion for that. And implicit in these Calvinist, it all kind of boils down to the fact that the Calvinist God and Calvinist theology is static as can be. It's powerless. It can do nothing. It has no ability to adapt. I am the Lord thy God. I change not. Blah 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 blah. So it's all implicit in it is a static, non-being thing, which is why the end of it is utter nihilism and meaninglessness and vanity, which we've discussed
And
before.
right.
So all of
And so they
that, there's
project,
no transition to be had.
and then they project all that on God. So you have a God who's impassible, a God who doesn't respond, a God who is just one way, and then your
Exactly.
picture of God. It's very infantile, all this stuff,
Yeah,
psychodynamically.
it is.
So if we bring your comments up, I'm gonna tell you where this is headed, Doug. We're
Yeah.
headed to a discussion about vampires. It sounds funny, but if you have no virtue, if you have no real virtue, you gain virtue by stealing it from others like a vampire.
Yeah, yeah.
You
I
live
talked about that with
forever.
you before.
Alistair
Yeah.
Begg dies. You live forever. You become one of the great giants of the faith. There's so many things like this. It ties into narcissism. A vampire can't see their own reflection, so they have to get it from other people. They
I
have no
like that.
shadow, and so you have to take the shadow of other people. You see, it's
Yeah.
anyway. So I think
That's
this will
great.
come out. I mean, Nick was the one that pointed this out earlier, but I think this will
That's
come
good.
out
Good
as we
thought.
start looking at your comments.
Yeah, that's pretty cool. I thought about that. I didn't know what you're going to say, but vampires. There could be a book in this somewhere.
It's I mean, mythopoetically, it's almost like the vampire was developed as a satire of these kinds of people who are
Yeah,
doing
yeah,
this to
yeah.
Alistair Begg.
We call it
Yeah.
vampire theology.
Yeah.
Yeah, there we go.
So your first comment here, I guess I'll just read your comments and then you
Okay,
stop
okay.
me to comment when you want to. You said regarding MacArthur, either one of you, regarding MacArthur and others. And by the way, for those listening, these are Doug's comments that he wrote down thinking about this. Regarding MacArthur and others, all this exemplifies a furthering of their omnipotence and glory and demonstrates how profoundly wise they are because they know it all and have a theory of everything. Dogma serves as a defense against being small and the fear of powerlessness and annihilation of
Hmm.
non-existence.
Could we
Yeah,
have Doug expand on that?
yeah. I've tried to look at this psychologically because it provides a frame of reference from my clinical background. But I do believe that there's something uh, really important about what's happening to this group, the MacArthur group. And I know John. I mean, I love the family, and I don't have an agenda against John.
Yeah.
Um, but I do think that uh, there is a sense in which, more from a psychological frame of reference, that they feel powerful. They have the
Hmm.
secrets.
Hmm.
They're in their own way now omnipotent because they have all the answers. They're a bit omniscient because their answers apply to every corner of the globe and universe.
Mm-hmm.
And I really believe it's a really early childhood dynamic of trying to organize and sustain an identity that is more powerful than you really are at three. But you want to be, and you want to be. I mean, we all do at three. I remember back
You
when I was
put on the
three, smoking.
Superman shirt.
Yeah. I was 3 years old, smoking a cigar and having thoughts about this. But I do believe it's very infantile because it suggests that they're reacting to something psychologically within themselves that makes it so important to cling to dogma. And I do believe there are underlying fears of annihilation, of non-existence, of feeling small or feeling inferior or
Oh.
insignificant.
Okay.
Build on that.
Okay. Okay. I see where your thoughts were going a little bit more clearly in that last sentence there in that excerpt. Okay.
I'm not
Okay.
sure I'm clear on any of these thoughts. These were just my
Well,
Yeah.
brainstorming
that's
musings.
okay. That's
But
okay.
yeah, we can
That's
toss
part
them
of the fun.
around.
That's part of the fun of it,
Yeah,
you know?
yeah, I agree. I
Um,
agree.
so what it's reminding me of is, like some guys that that have been friends of mine who throughout their childhood or throughout their adolescent years may have had some kind of a vile affection or a dysregulation or an inability to deal with their physical size. And one of the things that they do is maybe I need to get a little bit stronger or something like that. So they start going to the gym. And that's great. That's amazing because there's so many things within it's such an ancient practice to go through some, the process of lifting something or pushing something that is a little bit, ahead of your current capacity, and then to build, and have something like hypertrophy or strength accumulation develop and then but there will be some guys who will start using steroids and stuff like that, and then they get to such a degree where in 2 3 years they're so puffed up, they're so big, yet they're so emotionally there's no proportional emotional strength or emotional fortitude that um, that couples with the physical strength or the physical fortitude. So you have this huge dude who emotionally is like an infant, like this big,
Yeah, yeah,
and they are
yeah,
still in their personality and in their decision making and in their interpersonal relationships and even in their relationship with themselves. They think and they feel like there's this ever looming sense of doom or annihilation of that particular person. You know what I'm saying? So that's kind of the sense that I got with what you were saying about these people, is just using the example of a young man who
yeah,
has those kinds of problems and starts using steroids or something like that, and there's no reciprocal growth in with emotional growth, with bodily growth. And one of the best things about the ancient Greek philosophers was that they were very adamant about the body representing and the body representing or being an appearance of a person's inner being.
yeah.
So, which
Good
is why
point.
you have all of the statues which are sculpted and carved with, or the paintings that are painted with such contour to the man's body or something like that, because this was the state of his soul. It was
Yeah,
fortuitous and brave and strong and had a spine and could hold the world on his shoulders. And I think
yeah,
that in
yeah.
modern time that's been reversed, obviously, or inverted, you know.
Really,
Hmm.
really good point. Really good way to kind of look at this from an analogy, because my argument when I talk about something representing more infantile developmental stages is that it seems to me that there are some, and I would put Calvinism in this camp, that haven't grown out of it. There's nothing wrong with wanting to feel omnipotent and powerful, and I used to have thoughts before I went to bed of being the hero figure that
Hmm.
so I would be Thor. Thor was my guy. Um,
Okay.
Sort of disappointed in him lately, but anyway, Thor. So, uh, and I would fantasize about that. And well, why was I doing that? Well, I was doing
Yes.
that as
Yeah.
a compensation, as a part of my developmental process, and it felt good. For some, it will feel really good when their team wins today,
Hmm.
if they've chosen a team, because they will feel powerful. They will
Hmm.
feel now if that's their psychology, as what you're alluding to here, Nick. If that's their psychology in general, they haven't grown out of it, and they'll maybe
Hmm.
even be devastated if if Kansas City or San Francisco doesn't win. So it's a really good analogy because, sometimes I was in a takeout store, taco place recently, and there was this kid in there. He must have been about 30 or 28 or 5 or 7 or something like that. But he was really bold. And I was going to ask him about something about that, but then I thought, well, he might feel I'm hitting on him or something. I don't know what he was, whatever. Because see, I don't know what is
Yeah.
inside of him. I don't
Mhm.
know. Just like the grandson of this grandmother, we don't know what's inside of the grandson. We've just shunned him and eliminated him.
Yeah.
But anyway, back to what you were saying, Nick. I think that's a really good example of those who haven't grown out of it that now need steroids, and they keep building on it, and they can't stop. Because it's
Yeah.
an external frame of reference and identity. I think I point something like that out in the notes I had too somewhere. Well, I know I did. Um, so that's great. I like that analysis. That's good.
Well, it just comes. It's gotten to a point in our modern day where it has inverted itself to such a degree where if you are and don't take this the wrong way, but if you are a very um I guess you could say well built or strong looking person, like aesthetically, then sometimes that can indicate that you're actually not in a good frame of mind, or you're not emotionally fortuitous, or that you actually do have a lot of emotional dysregulation. It can be an
Yeah,
indicator of that, where in
yeah,
the past it used to be like, oh my gosh, this is a man who you better be weary of contending with if you are going to be, come at him in a dysregulated way, where he would kind of set you straight. You know what I'm saying? That's one of the
yeah,
things I love about Plato, is that his name means thick. He was a thick human being who engaged in Greco-Roman wrestling and encouraged it in his philosophical writings, that young men need to learn how to wrestle. They need to learn how to be strong, physically imposing. And so that whole thing has been inverted, and now you can come across people who are, spend so much time at the gym and doing steroids and stuff like that, where it's like, I'm not going to go near him because he might be super volatile and emotionally dysregulated, you know? So, and it
yeah,
makes that person
yeah,
more dangerous too, because they don't have the wisdom to be able to control the power that they do hold.
Hmm.
Do you know what
yeah,
I'm saying?
yeah, yeah,
So like somebody who has so much influence, like John MacArthur or John Piper, they don't
Yes.
have the wisdom to wield that influence properly.
Exactly, which is why John MacArthur
yeah.
ends up insulting Alana. Do you know what I'm saying? Or
Yes, yes,
belittling her. Kevin, that's an
yeah,
example of Ganon um insulting or capturing wisdom or capturing Zelda when he did that to Alana. And there was no link to be had,
yeah,
by the way, there.
yeah,
Sorry.
yeah. But if we're gonna do vampires, might as well
All
throw
right.
in Zelda.
Let me bring up the next paragraph real quick. Um, Here we go.
You guys
Okay.
rooting for either team today?
Uncle Travie. So I'm
We-
rooting for Uncle Travie. So we watched
There
the
you go.
documentary. I'll just say this real quick. We watched the documentary on the Kelsey brothers, and
Oh,
Jason Kelsey's son called Travis Kelsey Uncle Travie. And then it's kind of funny. So really, I'm really not invested in who wins, but I am looking forward to eating some pizza and wings while they're playing.
me too. Me too. Ours is chicken pot pie, but yes.
Yeah, let me put this back up here. So the next paragraph, psychologically, and these are Doug's comments again for those watching. Psychologically, we all need to feel important, to have worth, etc. But when your worth is attached to ideas, there isn't much going on internally. And this is where I would wave around Wayne Grudem's book, such as how the experience of God's love does or doesn't reach out to others.
hmm.
Alistair Begg challenged an idea in an atmosphere where ideas are everything, not the complexities of a lived out reality. Christ's love is just an idea and no more.
Amen.
You want me to
Smart
keep
man who
going?
said that.
What was that? I can keep
Yeah,
going.
yeah, let's keep going, and then maybe they'll tie in to.
Yeah, I do
But
think
man,
that's
I really believe all that I said there. Uh, we're all in a process of living out the gospel and working out our own salvation. And if we attach our identity to ideas, then we have a plastic identity.
and
You
it's
know, we aren't
immovable.
made of it.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah, I think that's what the problem with a lot of types of immature Christianity are. There is no lived out complexity component to the versions
yeah.
of Christianity that are out there oftentimes. It's just ideas. And then when it comes to actual real life, they fall very short of being performatively helpful at all.
And I think that's
The
part of why the Pentecostal movement has the movement it has, is because it seems to be lived out. I don't necessarily think it is necessarily, but it sort of has that feel, right? Of
Right, it has a
we're living it out
participatory
right now.
component to it.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
The next paragraph, Alistair Begg was
Could
Sproul's
I
one molecule.
could I say
Go-
something before we move to that
yeah,
paragraph?
yeah, go
Because
ahead.
that one you just gave me pause when I first read it, and the two key phrases were the statement that somebody's worth can be tied up with the ideas. Like that's huge. You know, I would have never phrased it that way or thought to phrase it that way, but it has to do with, like you said, Doug, somebody's sense of self-worth or self-esteem is definitely tied up into the identity or to the ideas or the groups that they identify with, right? So it's not, so we've talked before about, people's identity being wrapped up in a particular group or a particular ideology or stuff like that. But a side effect what's coupled to that sense of identity is an identification measure which tells you what you're worth in that idea space, or actually in that atmosphere, which is what you said next,
Yeah,
because you
yeah,
you pointed out that the particular environment that we're talking about right now is one in which ideas are everything.
Mhm.
So if your sense of self-worth is all wrapped up into the ideas, then your entire existence in that group of people is going to depend on how you scale within the idea complex.
yeah.
And for Alistair McGrath to or Alistair McGrath, Alistair Begg to deviate from the whole idea, or to be antithetical to that idea, means that he's worth nothing. Hence why he's been kicked out. It's so
Yeah,
easy. It makes it a
good.
lot easier to be impersonal
Yeah,
when you're analyzing people at a limited variable set. It's
yeah.
there's not multivariable dynamics going on in these
Mm.
communities.
Right, right, right.
It's
Single
very
variant.
flatlined, very plateaued. A very and you know what that's an indicator of, mythologically speaking, is that they're in a desert where everything is flat and
Oh,
dry
interesting.
and everything
Yeah,
is meaningless and substant, and there's no sustenance in an environment like a desert. A desert is There's a scarcity of everything. So
yeah,
when you find yourself in this is just coming to me now, when you find yourself in environments where there's like it's univariant, you better look out, because that probably means that there's not other hierarchies of value that you can input into, and make yourself part of the Pareto distribution where you're in the top 10%, so you get all the resources, and then that gives you sustenance, it gives you a little bit of presence, it gives you a little bit of being, it gives you a little bit of power, to actually be an expressive human
yeah,
being.
yeah,
And in these environments, you're just flatlined, you're nothing, you're a speck of
yeah,
dust.
In the
But
real
I like
world,
the,
if you optimize for one variant, you usually do so at the expense of other things, and you have second and third order consequences where things pan out other than how you intended, usually
Hmm.
negative third. But if you're in a shared fiction like Calvinism, then you can specify a single variant by which things are evaluated and then therefore ensure that you stay on top of the prestige hierarchy.
Oof.
and then you gain a lot of power and belief that you have a self, that you have personhood because of ideas. And ideas aren't unimportant, but if you're gonna gain identity and personhood and self-esteem and worth, but just the conceptualization that I am somebody, uh, and you're going to draw from ideas to be somebody, good luck, because it doesn't go very far. But you feel powerful, you feel uh, present, you feel alive, you feel you have existence, you have meaning in the world, whatever, because you've aligned yourself with MacArthur and powerful figures. And so you're in, and it's just all it is a thought, and you're in. It's just a thought.
Yeah, yeah. It's
Crazy.
one thing to borrow power from God Almighty, but if you can't do that, you can create a little fake reality in which you redefine God and you have a new kind of worldview, and then you can borrow power from that as far as all the
Yeah.
people who are also in that echo chamber are
Well,
concerned.
but I've argued too that, before I think on one of our times together that who's getting the glory in this? It's MacArthur and everybody
Yeah.
else because they know the absolute truth because they're the inhabitants of ultimate wisdom and truth, and they get to cast out whom they and really this relates to God too, because they project it onto God, and therefore in Calvinism, God just dispenses with whoever he wants to dispense with
Right.
and cancels them for no apparent reason
Right.
and
Right.
loves the other ones,
If
right?
God
So
cancels people, why can't we if we're in his image, right?
Right.
absolutely, absolutely.
All right. There's this famous quote that gets posted a lot around the internet, which states, it's a R.C. Sproul quote. If there is one single molecule in this universe running around loose, totally free of God's sovereignty, then we have no guarantee that a single promise of God will ever be fulfilled. And so it looks like you pulled from that in your next comment when you said Alistair Begg was Sproul's one molecule.
Yes. Yeah, he was. And what a buffoon. I mean, I shouldn't say that. What a lack of real wisdom, for somebody
Yeah.
to say that God just can't manage anything other than that. It's, I just laugh at it because it's so stupid. Um, it just is. I mean, I don't even know how to describe the feeling I get when I hear that quote because that assumes something about God that's a direct reflection of my own limitations. Unless I
Right.
can control everything, absolutely, I wouldn't be able to get anything to happen in my family or in my marriage or in my career. And it's just, it's just, again, borrowing power and just a very infantile way to look at God. God must just laugh his head off at this or rage inside himself or whatever when he sees this quote, uh, because you've just constrained the power of God because you can't imagine it for yourself anymore.
Oh, wow. You just constrain the power of God because you can't imagine it for yourself anymore.
Yeah.
Hmm.
That's so psychologically profound of what's going on there. Your next comment, when dogma is used to enhance personhood, let alone power and personal glory, then the exploration of truth no longer exists because
Irrelevant.
now all the data has to point to the dogma and it can't be outside the data set that we've already laid claim to.
Yeah. 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 I mean, that's how I look at it. If that's your process, if that's your definition of selfhood and your existence and your personhood, then you can't think through anything. But you don't have to, partly because you just don't have to. You got
Yeah.
your idea, you got your dogma, so you're in some way, shape, or form. And you can be
So,
a real jerk in life and still believe the
and
idea.
justify it.
Yeah, yeah.
Over
Oh,
here, you're talking about this make-believe world where ideas are everything and it's not the complexities of a lived out reality. And so
Yeah. Yeah.
it's like you're tying into that here. For example, if we take the idea like this, not something lived out, of being born again, it's more than an idea. It's the start of a lived out reality that influences every choice we make. But I think you're right that they have it's like they've collapsed this start of a lived out reality to just an idea that people make a truth claim about. It's just
Yeah.
a proposition that people cling to and hold on to, and it
That's why
doesn't point
Nicodemus
to
couldn't
anything.
understand it. That's why Nicodemus couldn't understand it, in part,
Hmm.
uh, to begin with,
Hmm.
because ideas, Pharisaical ideas or the thought processes at that time, the Jewish context, couldn't grasp the idea of it or the metaphorical power of it.
Hmm.
So the next, I have so many thoughts going through my head about that.
Me too.
Alistair Begg was used as a target of projection, a receptacle that leaves MacArthur and others empty of their shadow. So these, you're probably going to have to double click on both projection and shadow for the audience,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
therefore makes them perfect, holy, and righteous. And this is not a righteousness that comes by faith, but by prescriptions to ideas that must be exalted.
Yeah. So projection is just simply what we see in others that's really about us. So, we all do this. I mean, there's nothing particularly unhealthy about it unless we do it all the time.
Hmm.
But for example, we might, uh, my wife can be avoidant in picking up phone calls, for example. She won't, often, and it frustrates me. Well, partly because it frustrates me because I don't like that within myself. So I sort of project that
Ah,
frustration onto her, and therefore I don't have to own it. This is the key. I've gotten rid of it within my own personality. And that's true of the shadow too. We have a dark side, we have a saboteur inside, we have things that we don't match our ideals and what we think we should be believing. And so, if we can get rid of that by putting it in somebody else, or metaphorically, right?
yes, yes.
Then I don't have to own it anymore. I don't have to deal with it. And that's what happens in a lot of Calvinism, a lot of MacArthurism, and a lot of not political MacArthurism, but John MacArthur isn't.
Yeah, yeah.
Um, well, you have to be careful here. It is to me a emptying of their selves into a target that
Yes.
can inhabit their shadow and their projections of their worst self. And therefore, they
Hmm.
don't have to have a bad self. They don't have to have a worse self. And they'll stand up there and say, I'm a sinner like everybody else. But that's just an idea, too. Right?
So I think this is where our conversation earlier, I was, because Nick and I were discussing your comments earlier before we came on this video, and the absence of a shadow. I think Nick said something like, "How unsettling would it be if you knew somebody who had no shadow?" And that's when we started talking about vampires, and we started. And then I think that prompted Nick to start exploring all the different ways in which they're like vampires, like they have no shadow. They
Yeah.
cannot be
Yeah.
in the light or they'll disintegrate. They fall apart. So they have to be in an enclosed little area that harbors them. They have no reflection. So as a narcissist, you constantly have to see your reflection in everybody else. And like a vampire sucks blood from everybody else to live, the these guys need external validation in order to gain their prestige. They have none of their own. They have to suck it out of somebody else. They have to put somebody
Yeah.
else down or
Yeah.
borrow power from somebody.
Yeah.
It's just like
Yeah.
a vampire. It's almost like
Yeah.
a vampire was invented as a trope specifically to satire these kinds of people.
Yeah. I like that.
Yeah.
I think too, along that line is Calvinists have a significant need for the Alistair Beggs of the world.
But
It's
they
a
need a devil.
driving, yeah, that's why they can preach Calvinism from the pulpit because they can project it onto other people that don't happen to agree with them and bully them into being a receptacle for themselves of their own shadow and their own darkness. But I think that vampire idea really is good. I really like that. Uh, think about that some more. But because when you first said it, I thought, Jesus didn't have a shadow. He really didn't,
Right.
right? So
So a vampire is a simulacrum of light.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
It's not the real thing.
Well,
Not the real thing.
Jesus didn't have a shadow because in the first account of um John 1, it's kind of being explained that he is the light. So it's when Jesus would be around you, what would happen is he would basically point out to you your shadow. Like if he was he would make the shadow because he's the point of origin for the light that lighteth every man that cometh
Yeah,
into the world.
yeah.
Right. Um, so he's perfectly integrated into himself, um, already,
Yeah,
and whatnot. But we're not. But that's the process that we're undergoing is to integrate that shadow. And because you have to think about it, like, so Jesus had no shadow. However, he did get angry, and he did use what would be called, I guess, aggressive language or aggressive behavior, or aggressive patterns of behavior in order to um you know in order to act agentically in the world. I mean, part of your part of your psychology would have to be a deeply integrated shadow to be able to withstand the amount of pain and suffering that he had to go through in order to be crucified and not whine out like a baby.
yeah,
Do you know what I'm
yeah,
saying? And then
yeah, yeah.
there's deep shadow integration that goes on with being able to withstand the type of pain and suffering that he went through, but also to have the wherewithal to say something like, "Forgive them, Father, for they know not what they do," and to speak words that kept him like fully formed as a person, and it didn't degenerate, right? So
Yeah.
there's all sorts of those things. But the vampire thing, it just kind of came a little bit quickly because you had said something about that, people like this will empty their shadow. And I do think that psychological projection is while I think rightly pointed out that it's not inherently this bad thing. When you said that you had dreams about being Thor as like your sort of ideal being in particular instances in your life, you're actually projecting yourself onto Thor momentarily.
Yeah,
And what happens is you know, you project yourself onto Thor. Thor does all of these great and virtuous things, and then that gets returned back to you and internalized. And now, when you wake up the next morning, you might be able to do something that is more Thor like. That's
yeah,
integrating the
yeah,
projection that has happened. And that's
yeah,
exactly what we're doing
Hmm.
when we play
Wow.
video games, is that we're projecting
yeah,
ourselves onto the main character, like it's like it's more literal, like we're cognitively projecting ourselves onto the video game character, because what we will do is it'll change our whole language set, where you can ask somebody, what are you doing? Oh, well, I'm going through the mountain, and then I'm gonna go defeat this dragon. So it's like, no, you're actually sitting on a couch, but cognitively your projection casting is so strong that you will even say first person what you're doing. But then you defeat the video game, or the character in the video game defeats the monster, and it returns back to you and informs you in some way, and you're able to act in the world in lieu of that. So
yeah.
projection itself is not a inherently evil or malevolent
Correct.
phenomenon.
Yeah,
However, when you said that they will project their shadow,
Hmm.
they will empty their shadow onto other people. That's a whole nother phenomenon in itself, where it's a denial of responsibility for who you are. you know um it's all of the things that you've already pre-condemned about yourself, and you don't have the balls or the strength or the virtue to be able to actually contend with those things within yourself. So you just kind of cast it off to somebody who's the easiest object in front of you. And that, as far as I'm concerned, is a sign of great cowardice. And because not only are you afraid of somebody like Alistair Begg, corrupting your Calvinism and everything, what it means if you're projecting your shadow onto him is that you're actually afraid of yourself. You know
Hmm.
what I'm
Yeah.
saying?
So I want to double
Yes.
click on this statement. I can't, you were just hitting on it just then, Nick, and I can't remember if you or Doug said it earlier that the Calvinists need someone like Alistair Begg. They need this kind of guy. I want to share a
Yeah.
quote from a book. It's The Coddling of the American Mind, Chapter 5, about witch hunts, which occur within ideologies. And he says, it's a quote from Eric Hoffer, which says, mass movements can rise and spread without belief in a God, but never without belief in a devil.
Oh, that's good.
And it's like these people constantly need something bad to juxtapose themselves against
Yeah.
to justify their own existence.
Yes.
Otherwise, they can't look virtuous.
Yes. So that I think I pointed that out someplace, but in my notes, or I had a final note that wasn't a part of that I sent. I need to
Oh,
go
I
look
got
at
them.
that.
I got it loaded too. I can show
Okay.
it if you
So
want.
before we do I call that counterphobic, and what I mean
Ah.
by that in
Mm.
sort of psychological terms is that um, you create an identity out of what you aren't, and
Mm,
and
mm.
and therefore you have one. It's sort of
Counterphobic.
like it's sort of like on assessments. It's a lot you have a like or a dislike comparison sort of thing as you're going through the assessment. You're clicking the bubbles, and it's a lot easier for people to know what they don't like than what they like, or
Mm,
who they aren't, as opposed to who they are. So we know this. There's something about creating an identity in childhood around who we don't want to be,
mm,
and who we want to be, like a superhero, so that if we take that into adult life, then the measure of my identity is no longer who I've become, it's who I haven't become. It's who
Mm.
I'm not. And that's just a house of cards.
mm,
It really is
mm.
a house of cards, because
The alternatives are
you don't have a well
infinitely
defined.
limitless.
Yeah, you don't have a well sustained identity. You haven't participated in creating one. And I think our Christian growth and sanctification is a participation of God into a real identity.
Mm.
Uh,
Mm.
and that's where the Holy
Yeah,
Spirit comes
I'm
in.
having a good time chewing on this. This is interesting. Counterphobic. Counterphobic. Huh.
Yeah, you don't really want to be something. You find something you can counter against to shape your reality. We all
Holy
are
cow.
shaping our realities every day,
Yeah.
right? Whether we know it or not.
We were just talking
Um,
about that.
yeah, we do. We shape them every day. But that's sort of like Whitehead's sort of ideas of process philosophy a little bit in this. Not that I'm
Well,
that
everything
now,
you
but
do like changes what is available to you to do.
yeah,
You know, if
yeah,
Right.
if you take the trash out, now you have an empty trash can, and you know what I mean? Everything
yeah,
changes something.
yes,
So you're involved, you are participating in co-creating your reality,
yes,
one small decision at a
yeah.
time.
That's why we're working out our salvation. That's why we're becoming. We're trying to figure out. I don't believe growth is change. I believe growth is becoming. Basically, who we already are, who God knows us to be in our mother's womb, and has planned for us, not in a Calvinistic sense, but knows we have the potential to become.
Yeah, I
So
like
if I'm
that.
going to
Mm.
become something because of a set of ideas, or because of some kind of counterphobic reality against people that I have to adhere to, so that I'm not the other, or not my shadow, I'm not these other things, then there's no substance to that. It's just an idea, that has no way of, you have no way of living it out. There's no path ahead to live it out.
Right.
So if I believe that born again is just a concept that's similar to being born in my mother's womb, and I like the parallel, but if that's all it is an idea, and I'm not therefore responsible to work that out, to work out the gospel, to work out the beauty of God's grace and amazing and awesomeness. If I don't have a reality to have to live out, that's why God wants us to love Him with our heart, mind, and soul, because it's lived out. That's not an idea. Loving God with your heart, mind, and soul isn't an idea. It's a lived out experience.
Right.
To me, first and foremost. So I can't remember where I'm going in all this, but get me started. Like a wind up.
So the comment that you had, it says this last one that you put in was,
What was it? Yeah.
my identity is built and reinforced around
Oh, yeah.
that's
Okay.
not me, therefore I am. Instead
Yeah.
of I think, therefore I am, like Descartes,
Yeah.
that's not me, therefore I am, which
Yeah, that's a
is,
good way to put it. Yeah.
I mean, you put it that way. I guess that is a
Well,
good
I
way to
guess I
put
did, didn't I? I said that. So I praise you for something I said. Talk about projection.
It's a primitive developmental phase that adults use to discern who they are. The last comment on this first, and so there's another page of these, and then the last comment on this one, the last paragraph was, Alistair Begg was used as a target of project. Oh, we already read that one. Let's
Yeah.
go to the next one. Spirituality, therefore, boils down to one's belief structure and avoids the complexities of living out a vibrant, meaningful love for our neighbor. So that ties back into the idea down here. It's an idea set instead of lived out reality. Being born again is just an idea. And then over here, spirituality can just be a set of ideas, which is what it is in what we call blue or stage 3 Christianity. And it avoids the complexity of living out vibrant, meaningful love for our neighbor or any other way we live things out.
Yeah.
We carry within us, stop me at any time.
Yeah, keep going.
We carry within us a miraculous power to love others and influence them to achieve greater heights through the indwelling Christ and Spirit. We don't cancel them or shun them if they don't adhere to our beliefs. Here's a
I believe there is a
question.
miraculous power that we have that we underestimate, that we can move mountains with faith. And I believe we're given a miraculous power to bring love to the world and to others. And that grandmother has assuming she's an obedient believer and really knows the Lord, has a miraculous power to bring love into a setting of a wedding.
Yeah.
She just does. And I would love to have helped her with that too, but that would have been part of my angle with her.
Well, it's like a momentary kairos. You
Yes.
you have this momentary, you have an opportunity that is absolutely pregnant with potential, and you can either take advantage of that
Or
or you
squander
can
it.
resort to your identity and just completely flush it away.
Yeah. I think this is a big thing. So Kevin and I brought up this notion when we were talking earlier this morning. And so I'm actually really glad that it kind of just emerged out of the conversation again naturally, which probably means that we're spot on with it, is the notion of seizing an opportunity to act in a transformative or wise manner, or a moment of kairos, like Kevin said, when it uh, when it when it presents itself to you. And what's kind of scary about this whole thing, from my perspective, not being, really involved or having anybody in my social circles that would, that it would be relevant for, is part of the trick is actually having your senses honed to notice when those moments are happening. And it's like, I told Kevin that as I was watching YouTube videos from Todd Friedel and Justin Peters and these bozos, They're totally missing this precious opportunity that you were talking about, Doug. And they're like squandering about and floundering about like a bunch of fish out of water
Yeah.
because that's what they are.
Yeah.
There's a moment where they're being presented with an opportunity to act at a level of wisdom that is across the threshold or across the parameters of what they know to be wise. And so they've constructed this little reality, like you said in your comments there, and now they're fish out of water. And
Yeah.
all fish out of water can do is flounder about and look for the water. And that without realizing that they probably need to develop some amphibious traits. you know, they need to learn how to be a frog and breathe outside of what they're used to. And they totally missed the mark. This is a great sin. This is a great sin for them because they've missed the mark. They
Yeah,
missed
the
the
sin is in the
opportunity.
response to Alistair Begg, not in what Alistair Begg did.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And they totally missed an opportunity to be like, huh, this is maybe beyond our current capacity to deal with.
So
And oh,
go ahead.
no,
Well,
go ahead.
well, I want to. I think before I say what I'm going to say, I want to say thanks to I think it's pronounced Ruigi Murray for the super chat. Came in a few minutes ago. Just wanted to acknowledge that, say thanks. I think there are limitations. Andy Stanley has been falling under controversial and opposition for some similar reasons. He's trying to convey something, and I think I know what he's getting at. And like if you apply a rule omega and all that, and I don't really have a problem with what I think he's getting at, but all kinds of people object to what he's doing, and they think he's supporting all kinds of things that I don't think he's really supporting. But I think there are limitations that we impose on ourselves because of the institutions of Christianity. Um, the institution is very rigid. So if you think of the best kind of spirituality would probably be cultivated through some kind of apprenticeship, like a one-on-one. Here's your mentor, here's your spiritual director, Count of Monte Cristo, uh, training to be an electrician or a plumber. You do an apprenticeship, right?
Mhm.
Well, that does not scale well. One-to-one does not scale well. It's very expensive. Institutions are all designed to scale for time and content. The problem is genuine Christianity does not scale for time and content. And so there's also, when it comes to an institution, there's a universalizing component. And otherwise, we have to have a policy that's good for everyone everywhere all the time. And we need to be able to specify what you could and couldn't do as an institution, because that's what we stand for as an institution. Well, real life doesn't work that way. Real life institutions map to an idea set, like Doug has in his comments, but real life has to be worked out. The complexities of living out the wisdom and the values. And so, if I am dealing with an individual in my life, I can maneuver wisely. But if I'm trying to act as a pastor in an institution, people get the idea that is now this universal policy that as a pastor, now our institution um, acknowledges the validity of these kinds of marriages, something like that. You see, it's like they have to scale everything up, and you no longer have the freedom to act as an individual trying to help
Yes.
another individual. Does that
Yes.
make sense? How
Yeah.
I think the
Totally.
institution constrains us
Yeah.
Yeah.
because of that.
Yeah. Yeah. No,
Yeah.
I get it. Um, I want to add something to the vampire thing.
Yeah.
But when you think of a vampire casting his shadow, or however you want to look at that from that psychological point of view, it's the shedding of blood that allows him to do this.
Yeah.
And he can shed the blood and drink the blood. And I find it interesting that in our basic element of our faith is that Christ shed his blood and
Mhm.
we need to drink it.
Mhm.
Um, so I
It's the other
like
way
the
around.
Ah,
It's
expansion of
like
the
it's like the
right.
metaphor a
Chamber
little
of
bit.
Powers in Superman.
Yeah,
The
Well,
yeah,
the
there's an opposite
Calvinists,
effect.
yeah, are
I think
taking
you're
everyone
pointing
else's
out.
powers.
I think you're pointing out the opposite action, where a vampire is looking to uh consume your blood. Christ is looking to have you freely accept his sacrifice, his shed blood.
to
Wow.
manage our own sin, our own shadow, our own darkness. So we're not projecting anything, we're introjecting. That's another
Hmm.
psychological defense. We're introjecting something that is of value and creates personhood for us in
So
our.
could you explain that? Introject? I've never heard that before.
Yeah, interjection is kind of taking something in and making it your own rather than getting rid of something within yourself.
Okay.
You're open to breathing in something. So sometimes why we do breath exercises and meditation is to exhale the bad and breathe in the light
Ah, okay.
kind of idea. So I think when we're called to eat of his flesh and drink of his blood, it's an admission that we have nothing to really offer in that, but
Hmm.
we can introject it and create identity formation around it and selfhood around it.
Okay.
So it's
Okay.
like the opposite of the vampire,
Yeah.
kind of. Still think
That
there's
is
a book
really
in it.
profound. And a vampire is like a simulacrum of a resurrection too. It's
Yeah,
Oh,
sim
that's
yeah,
right.
yeah,
it's
yeah,
a instead of order, disorder, reorder, it's order, disorder, murderer. You know,
yeah, yeah, yeah.
order,
That's a
disorder of
great.
the devil, something
You
like
guys are
that.
really onto
Huh.
something with this vampire thing. I really like
Well,
this.
Yeah.
it's interesting how these mythopoetic themes play out in patterns, and you
Yeah.
just really can't get away from them. It's like they're there for a reason. They've
Yeah,
existed for
yeah.
hundreds of years for a reason.
And
Yeah.
with vampires, you have victims. With Christ, you have grace and uh,
Yeah.
reaching out, and it's just interesting to. I'm going to be thinking about this for a
Well,
long
also
time.
like Christ, in Romans 8, the whole point of Romans 8 is that the followers of Christ get glorified. Um, in Calvinism,
Ah,
God gets glorified at the expense of anyone who would otherwise follow him because they can't. And he gets
Yeah,
glory at their destruction, just like a
right.
vampire. And so
So the
if you're a
vampire also, if
Calvinist leader, you do the same thing.
yeah.
Get transference of God's glory through the destruction of other people rather than through the glorification of other people.
yeah,
So
yeah,
if the vampire bites you, you also turn into a vampire.
yeah.
Where
That's great. I didn't think about
along the
that.
lines of the Romans 8 thing that
Yeah.
you will be conformed into his image and get
Oh, wow.
Yeah,
a
yeah,
a redeemed body.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah. This is great.
Interesting.
Do
So,
you want to get back to my notes, or do you want to
yeah, let
do?
me hit those up. I have a target time to quit. That's not a hard time. Um, a target time to quit around in about 20 minutes.
Okay.
S- So I'd like to that'll be 2 hours online.
I'm always
Um,
interested. I'm interested in what this guy's saying because it's like he didn't write
with
this
this
apparently.
guy, yeah. Is so you said here's a question. Should Christ's love for the world sound like hate?
Yeah,
Is
that's
it
what that
go ahead?
right. Well, that's what MacArthur and others suggesting that Alistair Begg do is project hate.
Yeah.
Um, that's it's going to be received that way. It's just going to be received that
Yeah,
way. So
regardless of how you justify it as
yeah,
love somehow. Oh, I'm
right.
loving them by not condoning what
Yeah,
they're doing and promoting the right way. They'll never
yeah.
see it that way.
No, never, because it is hate at some level. Hate
Yeah.
Yeah.
within ourselves we project out
Us
onto
Right.
using and
others.
theming,
Right.
black
You
and
Yeah,
white.
said
My team, your team.
yeah. Yeah.
Um, bringing it back up now. Is attending the wedding really celebrating one's sexual identity? I would be celebrating the power of love between two human beings at whatever level it's being expressed. No one bothered to ask what the grandmother's relationship to her grandson is, has been, etc., because that apparently does not matter. So shunning her grandson and the effect on the relationship she has built with him is apparently irrelevant. Also, is it possible her grandson is a believer, working out his own salvation, as in Philippians 2:12 through 13? I'll pause there.
Yeah, I think and I talked about that earlier, an example of my relationship with my grandson, but also we don't know anything about the faith development of the grandson. That's important too in this. Where is he in working out his salvation, or is he a believer, or isn't he? Because that's what love asks.
Mm-hmm.
Love asks
Yeah.
us to be concerned about those things.
Yeah.
And nobody in there's no love in Calvinism. I'm sorry. I'm not saying they can't love somebody, but the dogma itself precludes love because it isn't necessary. It's unimportant. What's important is your love for the idea, not your
Right.
love for
Oh,
people.
wow. Wow.
So,
That's right.
and that's why it gets so frustrating. I think that's where some of my anger comes from. I'll tell you this. In all the years of being a believer, I've read things like God hates the proud and gives grace to the humble and the righteous. And I've always just kind of gone along with that. Because of this example with Alistair Begg, now I really understand it. I feel it
Mm,
inside myself
mm,
now,
Mhm.
personally, that I can understand why God hates the proud. Maybe for the first time in my life, I can
Mm.
really
mm.
emotionally understand this. Um, I don't want to say any more about that, but it's just been a revelation to me. It's kind of a growth area for me because I want to see the world through God's eyes and through Christ's eyes. And I've never spent a lot of time thinking about that other than wanting to be more humble and trying to watch my own pride and my own whatever, that goes on there in my shadow and my prideful life, how I manage sin. But I've never experientially grasped it until now. I don't
Yeah.
think. And now
Yeah.
I get it.
Mm.
I really get it because I hate what they're doing in their pride. Anyway, that was
Well,
a
that's a
side
good
effect.
segue to this next paragraph. We are doing to you, Alistair, what you should have suggested the grandmother do, like supposedly should have. We are
Yeah.
shunning, canceling you, and she should shun her grandson. No more advice other than that. Take that, Alistair. How about instead using this as an opportunity to discuss how we as a church and as believers deal with a society in so need of Christ and his love?
Mm.
Now I'm being told what to believe, to be in, like in the in group. Nothing
Yeah.
outside of the exact right parameters taught by the big guns.
Regarding that last, you can leave them up here for a second. Regarding that
Yep.
last paragraph, I had to promise myself when I got in this podcast that I wouldn't swear. Okay.
You can,
Because, huh?
you can.
Well,
We don't care.
there's a real FU in this for me because
Yeah.
you don't tell me what to believe. You don't tell me what to repent in. I'm working out my own life and my salvation. Unless you see sin in my life and you want to comment on that in a conversation and a discussion, there is room for that. But now I'm supposed to, if I'm going to be in church, because most churches are like this, if I'm going to be in, now you're telling me this is what I have to believe. And I think, you can't tell me that.
You have to let the
I don't
zombies
know.
eat your brain.
Yeah,
You
yeah,
can no longer think.
yeah,
You have to let the ideology colonize your brain and occupy it like territory. And now your thoughts are its thoughts and vice versa. And you can no longer be on your own journey, working out your own issues with God and formulating your own
right.
pattern of wisdom and strategizing toward the thing that you need to be.
Yeah, yeah. And I kind of retaliate against that. But the paragraph before is really important to me too. We have a world out there that's so in need of Christ's love, so in need of modeling Jesus and his behaviors. Jesus dined with sinners, by the way. We have a world that needs us. The sick and the alien, or who need us, and not the righteous and that group. And my mission in life is I mean, I love the Lord. I love the gospel. And I love that I'm being called and privileged to manifest that to the world in whatever way I can, is such an honor. It's just, I talk about getting emotional. I really feel that inside, that God, I'm some kind of workmanship God can use. And I'm now supposed to go around shunning and condemning. I may not like gay lifestyles, transsexual issues. I mean, they're all kind of imposed on us, and we all have a reaction against that, and we're all mad about that, that we have to supposedly go along with it as if it's what God would have designed. So we're all a little mad about some of this stuff, but nothing's going to stop me from loving others. I'm going to start there and work my way backwards. I'm going to drink the blood of Christ. I'm going to eat this as flesh. I'm going to live that out before I go and decide that I, like God, have the right to judge and condemn anybody as my way of manifesting Christ in my life. I wouldn't be manifesting Christ in my life if I didn't go to my grandson's wedding, in my opinion. That doesn't have to be everybody else's opinion, but it's mine. And maybe this grandmother felt that. Nobody's given her the opportunity to speak up or for us to try to understand what she might have been going through, the conflict she might have had inside. And maybe she really wants to represent Christ. Maybe she really feels like she can influence her grandson. And now she's asked to shun him. God Almighty, what I say to that, you got to be kidding. That's your first response and only response? Can't we think this through? I mean, I don't know. Maybe I'm projecting my own shadow, my own desire, not to be loving or something else. I'm fine if somebody wants to confront me on that. But I think it's okay to have a passionate zeal for the gospel and the love of Christ.
Yeah, who else is it too? Who else is the gospel too? And if you behave in such a way that removes your capacity to influence those people, then what's your point of acting?
Yeah. What's the point of discipleship? What's the point of spreading the gospel to the world? And I'll tell you, it comes down to this. In Calvinism, you don't really have to. It's not really important. It is a different gospel. It doesn't depend on the message of the love of Christ and hearing. It depends on who God chose before the foundation of the world. Christ isn't really all that relevant.
That's right. It's a different gospel.
So want to really get behind it.
I want to plug on February 20th. I'm gonna use that as an opportunity to plug this. On February 20th, we're having a discussion at 4:30 Central Time. Leighton Flowers is coming on the channel to discuss whether or not Calvinism is a different gospel.
Oh, I'd love to be in on that or hearing that.
Yeah, so that'll be interesting. Looking forward to seeing how that will go. I want to throw in an idea. It's kind of late in the conversation, but I do want to throw in an idea just for food for thought. There's a Jonathan Haidt book called The Righteous Mind, and he has something called Moral Foundations Theory, and he maps out what the moral foundations are. And the 6 moral foundations are care, harm, liberty, oppression, fairness, cheating, loyalty, betrayal, authority, subversion, and sanctity, degradation. And the 6th one, sanctity, degradation, is where the concept of a divine ethic comes in. In other words, we only think something is right or wrong because we are convinced that God said so or didn't say so. There is no other kind of reasoning applied to it. There's not any fairness component. There's not a liberty oppression or a care harm component. It's just whether or not we think God said so, and that's what makes it moral or immoral. And so his charts map this out politically. And so I have taken the liberty, based on some of your comments, Doug, to kind of map this out religiously like this. And so it seems that the people who are doing this to Alistair Begg and basically fundamentalists in general, instead of having a more even set of moral foundations across the board, they're very thick, very much emphasis on the divine ethic, what we think God says. And it's not really what God says, it's what the ideology demands that they think God says.
Yeah.
And having this be the strongest moral foundation of a person or a group is what results in witch hunts and people being burned at the stake. And then there's authority or subversion. I'm God's anointed. You better not go against me. This girl should keep her mouth shut. And then loyalty and betrayal. You better do what the church covenant says you should do. And it's almost like they really don't care about fairness or cheating or liberty or oppression, because what my experience with fundamentalist groups is that they will all engage in cheating, oppression, and harm in order to make sure that these three stay intact with their in accordance with their ideology. And
Like,
does that make sense? And so
yeah,
it's almost like if this chart over here is this spiral dynamics, this would represent an upward mobility of consciousness, someone becoming more mature, somebody growing and transcending their previous level of consciousness and growing in
yeah,
Christ, for example. But it seems like this ideological moralism, this sanctity degradation thing, it is thicker and more intense the less mature one is,
yeah,
of mistaking the moralism of the ideology of the in group of the John MacArthur's of the world, mistaking that for God's morality, which is very often two very different things. Anyway, I wanted to put that up out there. I think that Jonathan Haidt's work is a great lens to kind of view things through every now and then,
yeah. No, I like
to see
that.
where people are coming from.
I think we have to look at how we think and how we process. And if you're, and I would argue in that the divine ethic, the problem in that chart that's a result of those, bullying and things like that, is the lack of recognition that ethics are lived out. They're not, if it's just an idea, the fruits of the spirit, for example, love, joy,
Right,
peace,
right,
long suffering, patience, all of that is irrelevant if you're not living it out.
right, right. So
So in
they
that
believe in
sense,
it as an idea, but they don't live it out.
yeah, yeah, because you can't live an idea out till you own it and internalize it and begin to think of what that would look like as a manifestation in your life. So if I'm going to manifest the fruits of the spirit, and I get interested in that, that's a lot different than just saying, okay, the Holy Spirit's working in me. At some point, those should become evident. Well, they're going to become evident if I intentionally manifest them through the power of the
Right,
Holy Spirit.
right.
And that's the working out to me of ethics is embodied in my life. So somebody at my funeral would say that about me, so to speak.
Yeah. In Peter Boghossian's book, How to Have Impossible Conversations, he's talking about ideologues with the goal of not being an ideologue. And he says that when you're trying to have a discussion with somebody, if they result to moralistic arguments, that's one of the ways you can tell that they're an ideologue. For example,
Yeah.
it's you could have a discussion about climate change, and maybe you're trying to discuss epistemic things like what this scientist said or what the IPC report from the United Nations said or what the temperatures are in Zimbabwe, whatever. Those would all be epistemic things that might be valid to talk about. But if someone says, well, if you just hate humanity and don't want a future for our kids, that's you've left the epistemic argument and you've gone to a moralistic argument, and now you're a bad person for not believing what I think you should believe.
So,
And we do that in Christianity a lot. We impose morality onto people. People are resorting to moralistic arguments rather than epistemically sound arguments, which is
yeah,
indicative of being an ideologue, which I
yeah.
think we need to work on and steer clear of and not do.
I think I'm afraid Nick canceled himself.
He may have
So
canceled him. I think he found his shadow, and I think he's removing his own podcast from the American Family Council right now.
it's
No,
just
he may.
incredibly important. It's incredibly important that we live out the truth because that's what the world sees. And it's embarrassing that the world's seen what's going on now with Alistair Begg. It's just embarrassing.
Yeah.
I don't know. I just really feel passionately about living out Christ's love. And it's not that I do it perfectly. I'm trying, and I'm sometimes I succeed, an experience at work recently where I was just starting out a new job. I'm doing it in addiction medicine program, and I walked in the front door and somebody had to open it for me because my badge wasn't opening the door yet. And he was a strapping kid, probably in his mid-20s, handsome kid. And I introduced myself, and he said his name was Anna. And so I'm pretty good at not showing shock in my face. So I
You
managed
got
it
that
well.
poker face going?
Yeah, yeah. But then as I was leaving, he was kind of directing me where to go, and I said, "Thanks, man." And I got halfway down the hallway and realized what I had said, and I came back and apologized, and he thanked me. And that could have been the start of a relationship. So I
Yeah, yeah.
wonder about him. I see him in the cafeteria sometimes getting lunch, or the employees can go get lunch. Am I not supposed to sit down with him
Yeah.
because he celebrates a transsexual identity? I guess not. I guess that wouldn't be honoring God. So I think of these things we have to look at ourselves in the real life of things,
Right,
Yeah.
what
right.
we're
These people
doing and
are
what we're
here. What are you going
saying.
to do with them?
Yeah, what are you going to do with them? And I think we should shine as lights in the world, and condemning people for their sexual identity isn't the way to do it. Um, and I don't condemn him for being transsexual. I don't condemn people for being gay. I don't condemn people, except for child molesters and
There you
cluster
go.
B personalities, maybe. No, not really. I try not to condemn, in my life, because that's just, it can be so easily a projection of my own shadow and darkness, and make me feel good. Calvinists and people like John MacArthur, they really feel good about themselves. They're living in their glory because they shun these people. That is sickening.
It's just sickening. I want to emphasize something. I want to say thanks to William Ken Jr. for the super chat. But I want to say that something I try to emphasize a lot is that I don't think we need to look at this issue so moralistically, because we're in a period, we're going from a modern era through the postmodern era, coming out of maybe into a meta modern era, that kind of thing, how some people diagnose or describe what's going on in society. And it is a legitimate function to question what is base reality, like what is really real, including what is biologically real and what is a construct. Now, I'm not saying that people's conclusions are correct on this, but I am saying it is legitimate to ask the question, is this a construct or is it real? That has to be asked. And I think we're at a period in mankind's consciousness right now where that is being asked in a kind of a practiced out, lived out way, and it's a phase that mankind has to go through. And I don't think we're going to be here forever, but I do think that as Christians we need to behave ourselves appropriately during this phase that mankind is going through. It's impossible that we don't go through this. So as this question is being asked, what is real and what is a construct, that we stand by and don't condemn people as they wrestle with this, because they
Yeah,
can't not.
yeah, that's
It
great.
must be wrestled with.
Mm.
I love that. I love that. Yeah, I think that and I think that's probably true of all of us here today, that wrestle with it. I think one of my message to everybody that's listening is to give them the opportunity to wrestle with this concept.
Yep.
This Alistair Begg concept is worth wrestling about.
Well,
It
yeah.
is
Well, if
really.
I could tag on real quick, I don't want to interrupt you, but I'm about to.
That was it.
Like if you're renovating a house, you want to, before you knock down any walls, you want to see what are the load-bearing walls here.
Hmm.
Society is interested, every generation is going to be interested in kind of renovating society, keeping the old good things, and we have to learn participatorily what is good from our traditions to maintain and bring forward, and it has to be questioned. Um, and so society is learning where the load-bearing walls are that don't need to be knocked down. And it's going to be a learning process. So we need to, if we have the wisdom of God, which we claim to, waving our Bibles around, maybe we could implement some of them and help midwife mankind through this transition rather than just judge everybody for it.
That's
Yeah.
brilliant. I mean, to think that we're involved in something that big around social constructs and the mindsets and worldviews of the day and can participate at that level in influencing that. I think that's awesome.
Well, I'd also like to piggyback on Doug's admonition to the audience to wrestle with the Alistair Begg controversy. And the way I'd like to piggyback on it is to also say something similar to what Kevin said, and that is to actually get a grip on scale in your evaluation of the Alistair Begg controversy, where Kevin was applying it at the scale of society and civilization. And you also you have to be able to evaluate it deliberately at the level of your proximal development. So getting a grip on just where you're at, and so that might mean, for example, that might mean that you have to wrestle with the Alistair Begg controversy at the level of should a Christian or should a Christian not go to a gay wedding? You may be in a place where what you need to wrestle with is the what a Christian counselor should advise.
Or not.
There's a lot of multifacets to this controversy that make it ripe for a lot of individuals to consider the scope of their development and also an opportunity to actualize or to actuate the level at which they're going to do some sort of personal analysis and or reflection on it. So feel encouraged to, take a bite size and maybe just wrestle about whether, Alistair McGrath should have
Beg.
or a pastor should be giving shoulds and should nots. Keep it simple. Or maybe you're in a place where you need to consider you're the leader of a big group or something like that. Maybe you need to consider the more meta value structure considerations of, are the people in my group ready to wrestle with, or am I even ready to wrestle with the internal value structures that something like the Alistair McGrath controversy is bringing up?
Alistair Begg.
That might be the level that's appropriate for you to challenge yourself to actually wrestle, because wrestling implies that there's going to be some kind of counterforce that's going to test the limits of your strength.
Right. And maybe
You
put
have
your
to
hip
put
out of
yourself
joint.
there.
Yeah.
So I want to, yeah, like the way you frame the question, should Christians go to gay weddings? I want to encourage people to frame the question in a way that won't result in such a universalizing answer. Like, when I answer that question, I'm not coming up with a policy that everyone who's a Christian either should or should not every time this scenario arises, but maybe is attending such an event a viable option for a Christian? Because they're going to have to make that decision. There's so many other factors other than the fact that you're a Christian on whether or not you could go, and it could just simply be on whether or not you have something else planned for that. You know,
Yeah.
I got two
And also
weddings on May the 4th, and I can only go to one of them.
yeah. But also the question, should you go to a wedding if they're unbelievers?
Mm.
I mean, if you're not going to go to a wedding because somebody's gay, because you feel like you're celebrating gayness, are you going to go to a wedding where there are two, or one's a believer and one isn't, or because the questions start to grow.
Yeah.
Are you going to go to somebody's dinner that's hosting a dinner, maybe in their small group, or just you've met them through whatever means, but they're living together but not married. So you don't go to that. It just gets ridiculous to me
I
at some
agree. I
point,
totally agree.
around what are we discerning in this. But I like your comments too, Nick. Those are powerful comments. They're just ways that I like that encouragement for somebody to take where they're at right now. And
Yeah.
I'm not trying to oppose anything on anybody at all. But if all of us here on this podcast can spark your thinking about broadening your way of internalizing biblical truth, regardless of this subject, but even in other ones too,
Yep.
then that's a win for me. I'm
Yeah.
sure for you too, Nick.
It's part of
Kevin.
developing the process of spiritual exercises. You know, you use events in the real world and project yourself onto Alistair McGrath, formulate some kind of a what would you do, project yourself onto the grandmother, project yourself onto the son, to the grandson, project yourself onto the the guys who have condemned Alistair McGrath. Project yourself onto all of those people. See how you do. Maybe you will suck.
Yeah.
Maybe you will suck at being John MacArthur. Maybe, you know, and maybe you might have a better way of, you know, reformulating John MacArthur's actions and then uh, interject. What was perform interjection, bring it back in, inform yourself again, and take that spiritual work that you did and carry it around with you when you have to go make a decision like Kevin has to go make on which wedding to go to, you know?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I think just the ability to, and the ability to think biblically for me is also just the ability to realize I'm not God, and at some level I don't have any understanding what's going on with God,
Right. Beginner's
really.
mind. Right.
Yeah. So I'm trying to sort these things out and not come up with pompous dogmatic decisions that in God's eyes make me look like a fool, and not humble. And I'm not trying to borrow God's power and God's omnipotence and so that I can appear like him. I want to appear like him because I love, not because of that. My identity isn't built around dogmatism, it's built around a kind of spiritual idea around I don't know everything, and God,
Yeah.
please keep informing me. And that
Yeah.
makes it fun too. I don't think it's any fun to be a Calvinist and know everything.
And you've
It's
been one.
not. It's
I've been
definitely
one.
not.
I've
Yeah,
been one too. I didn't
yeah.
like it.
No, it's really a personal and dishonoring of yourself is what
Wow.
that
Yeah.
is. It's just self-destructive because you're not engaging in the flow of spiritual life
Mm,
that water that wells up can well up within us. So it's a dishonoring and a destruction of your own personhood when you believe you're now God at some level, whether you think of it that way or not. So
So I was gonna offer you the last comments, Doug. I don't know if those were it, if you wanted to tag something else on the end.
well, I suppose if I had the last word, it would be probably a culmination of everything I've said, that we're to love our neighbor as ourselves and God with our heart, mind, and soul. And that should lead everything. And that should be how we internalize dogmatic principles as a lived out truth and not as just a belief structure I have. Let's live
mm.
it out, I guess would be my final thought.
Just wanted to stick these passages up there about love, everybody from Jesus to Paul to Peter,
Yeah.
elevating charity as the main thing.
It's
Um,
profound in scripture. Christ died because he loved us.
exactly. Yeah. Wow.
That's
It
why he
goes, so it
died.
goes right to the heart of the gospel, really.
The
Yeah.
heart of the gospel. That's why Calvinism's got the wrong gospel. They
Mm.
don't go to the heart of the gospel,
Right.
to me. That's my opinion. I don't want to dogmatize something I'm saying, but yeah, to love is, and I'm telling you, working out Christian love in your life isn't an easy thing. How do you love an ex that profoundly hurt you, or put your kids in the middle, or how do you love, people that have been that are spiritual abusers? How do you, I mean, I don't have a mastery of this. I just like to take people's cart into the grocery store out of an act of kindness because it
There
might
you go.
demonstrate love.
Do what
I'm
you
trying to
can,
work on
right?
that one. I'm trying to love my wife. I'm trying to love my kids and my grandkids. I'm trying to love people that are in front of me that aren't lovable, and I'm trying to work that out in a way that isn't arrogant and pedantic and dogmatic, but in a way where they really feel it. And I really am manifesting that. This is my
Mhm.
challenge in life every single day. And, it's like Mission Impossible if you're up for it. I believe I'm up for the challenge because I want God to shape my heart. And that's how I look at the Christian walk. Are we up for the challenge or not?
Mhm.
Because if we aren't, then we'll just subscribe to dogma that makes us feel good and believe we have
Yep.
personhood through that,
Yeah.
and we don't.
Yeah. That feeling of that sense of self-esteem that one is fortuitous enough to approach a challenge or be ready for a challenge is part of the virtue, the first imminent virtue of courage. Do you have the courage
Mm.
to really wrestle with this thing at the level that it's being presented to you? Because doesn't Jesus or doesn't Paul somebody, I can't remember if it's Jesus or Paul, says that I think it's Paul, that you will not be tempted more than you are able.
1 Corinthians
Because
10:13.
thank you. So that's part of the virtue of courage, is that you're to attend to and have enough self-esteem to fully form yourself to deal with the problem at hand for you, you know?
Yeah.
That's the first
Yeah.
step, one of the first steps.
One of the things I like to do too is I like to think of the energy that we live in. There's a scripture, I think it's in Matthew, and you guys would know it better than me, about seizing the kingdom. And I think there's something, or in Hebrews, where it talks about, um, make sure, put every effort in to make sure you're in God's rest and God's peace. And I think
Mhm.
this is a fight. This is what everything we're talking about today is a fight for the gospel.
Mm,
And we have to fight. We have to have that energy and that desire to wake up and fight for the kingdom and push back darkness. And
right.
that's one of my litmus tests for myself too. Am I fighting for the kingdom? I'm
Yeah.
trying to do that in how I love, but everybody might have a different way of doing that. But let's seize. I like the idea of seizing the kingdom, not as a negative of
Mm,
people trying to capture it and throw it away, but seizing the kingdom
yeah.
as we're trying to seize what it means to thy kingdom come, thy will be done.
Hmm.
Uh, I really like that idea because once I'm in a fight, then it helps shape what I do and what I think.
Yeah.
And if
Oh,
I'm not,
wow.
It's kind of like an existential battle cry of carpe diem, like seize the day. Like
yeah,
it's the sound of a trumpet that is kind of almost invigorating you in this visceral way to kind of take some responsibility for something, go after it, go into some challenge and, you know, try, give it your best shot and see what happens. As long as it doesn't take you out, as long as you weren't hubristic enough to go after, you know, the entirety of this whole thing and it just, kind of takes you out.
yeah,
Keep it at the bite size that is appropriate for your level of edification.
yeah. And everybody has a circle of influence, like Steve Covey talks about in the 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. Your circle is different. Everybody's circle is a little different, but seizing the kingdom, advancing the gospel, loving through it is in my circle is all I got, you
Hmm.
know. And I think that God's love is so profound in working through people that is a lot, that I
Mm.
get to be part of that. It's just a miracle happening every day,
Hmm.
potentially, and looking forward to that. And the grandmother might have been her grandson's miracle. and
Oh, wow.
probably is.
Yeah.
So let her be that. Don't tell her what to go do. I don't mean that, but let her be that because she probably loves her grandson and wants to be that. And
Yeah.
you, at least Alistair Begg gave her a way to do that, even though I don't think he should have advised that particularly strongly, other than suggesting it. But I think he gave her a pathway to love.
Hmm.
And for that, I admire him. And I admire him for not backing down
Yeah.
uh, because he gave her a gift. She was
Yep.
to take a gift to the wedding. I think Alistair may have given her a gift in her ability to bring that gift to the wedding.
Yep.
So
I think he
let's
Gave
let's
actually
her the
did
gift
say
of
I
freedom of
suggest.
choice.
let's not cancel him. He's canceled from all the radio stations, just
Yeah.
like that.
I'm going to have him on the podcast. We're going to have him on here.
That'd be
That would
awesome.
be awesome. Yeah,
If
yeah,
anybody
because
knows
I would
him,
love to
reach out.
talk to him. Yeah,
I'll try to reach
yeah,
out, see what happens, bring him on.
yeah. You never know. You managed to get me on it.
Yeah, that's tough as nails. Speaking of which, I really appreciate you coming on and sharing your thoughts. I think your participation on this channel is one of its saving graces. So I really appreciate you
That's
sharing
nice.
your wisdom and your insights.
Appreciate that. Yeah, yeah.
And any last words before we go for the day?
Why
Yeah,
don't
I
you take it
do.
away, Nick? Yeah, jump in.
I want to uh I want to come visit you, Doug. I'm getting tired of Kevin.
He's pretty one-dimensional, so I get it.
Yeah, pretty one-dimensional. All right. I think, yeah, well, a lot of people know this, but Nick is here.
Yeah. Oh, that's right.
Yeah. So
I forgot that. I can't do that magic. I'm not like the Wizard of Oz where you
your
open up
turn,
the.
Doug. All right. Let's do this again soon.
Yeah, yeah, this is awesome. Thanks for
Thanks so
having me
much.
and
Yeah.
being able to be part of it. Originally I thought, would Kevin want to jump into this? And I thought, I think Kevin would want to jump into this, but hopefully he trusts me enough to.
Well,
to
somebody else asked me to do a video on it, so your email was perfect timing. I'm like,
Oh, okay.
with Doug, yes. That's perfect. All right.
Well, I love you.
So
I love you both. I think you're awesome witnesses for the kingdom, and I love being in your presence and being on something like this with you. So
yes,
my heart
indeed.
goes out.
Thank you so much for that and for coming on. And everybody watching, thank you for watching and in the chat and all the super chats. Thanks so much. And we will see you all soon.